Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. We'll be debunking Freedom Rising, who makes his criticism against the project and Waleed Ali. And he goes on to make some points. We'll view his video and we'll debunk each and every single one of his points, God willing.
We're all feeling a million raging emotions right now. I am angry at these terrorists. ISIL's weak. I know it doesn't look like that right now, but it's the truth.
This is Waleed Ali, the Reza Aslan of Australia. For years he's been campaigning for people to stop being so worried about ISIS and Islamic terrorism. He's also been somewhat critical of Western anti-terrorism measures.
But there is no genocide.
Actually, he never said don't worry about terrorism. He actually said don't assume that they are bigger than they are, and they're not. And don't assume that all Muslims think alike. This is what Waleed Ali is basically saying.
Happening right now. We don't need to prevent genocide by supporting the Iraqi military to re-establish control of Iraq, do we?
Well, there are thousands of people who've lost their lives. There's 1.8 million people who've been displaced in Iraq from their homes. I'm not really sure that you could downplay the seriousness of what's going on there.
Now, in a segment on the project, Waleed Ali said some interesting things about the Paris attacks. He starts out by making a distinction between Syria and their followers.
What we don't know yet is if the attack was planned, ordered or funded by ISIL's leaders in Syria, because the problem is, this is what ISIL do. They take credit for any act of terrorism on Western soil so that they appear bigger and tougher than they actually are.
And this is a distinction without a difference, because all that matters is the damage that ISIS and their influence have done. And whether or not it was planned by leaders in Syria is fairly inconsequential. The result is the same.
Well, this is the Islamophobic tirade. They can't, they just say it's ISIS and it's Islam and that's the fault here, right? And they want to shift the goalposts and the blame. Yeah, sure, there is elements of ISIS. Yeah, sure, definitely they have a lot to be blamed for. But you notice the West and the Islamophobes don't like to speak about the elephant in the room. The elephant in the room that you don't want to speak about is the Western foreign intervention that created ISIS in Iraq, that created ISIS in Syria through the destabilization of those countries and setting up Western enlightenment that caused division and created tyrannic regimes like ISIS and so forth. But no, you don't want to talk about that. You just want to make the distinction between Islam and ISIS, but you don't want to make the distinction between ISIS and the West, who created ISIS. Let's continue with his rant.
Now you might be thinking, well, ISIS itself is only a symptom of the bigger problem. Islamism is the main issue. It's the ideology that's driving these groups and terrorist attacks. But that's not where Waleed's going with this. He's going to talk specifically about ISIS because there's an angle there that he wants to focus on.
ISIL don't want you to know they would quickly be crushed if they ever faced a proper army on a real battlefield. They want you to fear them. They want you to get angry. They want all of us to become hostile, and here's why. They want to start World War III, a global war between Muslims and everyone else. That's what they want to create. They want societies like France and here in Australia to turn on each other.
So at this point, I think most audiences would view this as a simple positive message. Non-Muslims shouldn't be directing their anger they have for Islamists at secular freedom-loving Muslims. Muslims and non-Muslims shouldn't needlessly attack each other, we shouldn't have chaos, etc. All basic stuff that should go without saying. But Waleed goes a little further than that.
They want countries like ours to reject their Muslims and vilify them.
We need to look at the teachings of the Quran. It is about, killing and beheading the non...
Okay, so now watch what this bogan Aussie does. He quotes Pauline Hanson about killings and beheadings of non-believers.
The non-believers.
So if you're a member of parliament or a has-been member of parliament preaching hate at a time when what we actually need is more love, you're helping us.
And with that, Waleed's position has changed drastically. What we thought was a pretty simple and straightforward argument is now entirely different. So firstly, I recognise it's Pauline Hanson, but let's take an objective look at what Waleed calls spreading hate. We didn't hear anything about Muslims as people. We didn't hear any hateful language. We just heard about the content of the Quran. Horrible verses like Surah 8 verse 12. I will cast terror into the hearts of those who disbelieved. So strike them upon the necks and strike from them every fingertip. Ah, no, what have I done? By showing these verses, which you can look up right now, and pointing out the obvious fact that they are horrible, me, along with many atheists, ex-Muslims and public figures.
Actually, see, that's the whole point. You are an ignorant fool that you are. You go to people like Ayaan Ali Hirsi, and you go to Wafil Sultan, and you go to these stupid Islamophobic website that quote verses out of context. Every single one of those verses are to do in the context of war. It's an instruction. You know, the Australian government, you idiotic person, the Australian government tells its soldiers to go out and kill the infidels who are Muslims, right? Go and shoot them, drop bombs on them, blow them to pieces, chop their bodies in part. If you see them, shoot them, handcuff them, whatever, right? So this is a war instruction done even by the army generals of the Australian government. But when Allah does the same thing for Muslims who are being oppressed, that suddenly becomes a violent verse. That suddenly becomes unjustified. So how is it justified that your army generals give legislations to go and kill Muslims? That's not violent, is it? So yes, spreading hate is you interacting and misquoting verses and making the Muslims look like the enemy and those who are full of bloodthirsty wanting to kill non-Muslims at any expense by chopping their verses of the Quran out of historical context and presenting them as warmongering verses and Muslims are evil. Yes, you are absolutely no different than ISIS, who you're just helping their cause. And Waleed Ali was absolutely correct and right that you Islamophobes are spreading hate by misinterpreting those verses. Can you imagine if I went into the Bible and I could misinterpret 100 verses and then I'd be a hate preacher, yeah? I would be one who is trying to cause mischief. And can you imagine I went out into the public and started saying, look at all of these biblical verses preaching hate and killing and murder and so forth, right? You'd call me a hate preacher, wouldn't you? You'd call me a liar, one who was trying to make a conflict between Muslims and Christians, wouldn't you? So why is it any different when you are now misquoting and misrepresenting verses out of context from the Quran and you are acting like, you're just one who is a peacemaker. You're just trying to show us the true colors of what Waleed Ali actually believes in. And you're trying to make that distinction between ISIS. No, you are no different than the ISIS members who misinterpret verses of the Quran. Come to my page, you will see I've debated ISIS supporters, how they misinterpret verses of the Quran to suit their opinion. You are no different from them spreading your hate and your lies. So thank you for proving the point. You are a hate mongerer just like the ISIS supporters and just like the Islamophobes and just like Ayaan Ali Hirsi. And then what does he do? He goes and quotes ex-Muslims saying, look, this is what the Quran says. I can show you verses of the Bible and I can show you so many Islamophobes actually saying that they want to do a crusade against the Muslims. Here's one that was actually posted to me just the other day. There's a person called Eric Anthony Turner who's on the Pauline Hanson Please Explain post. He's one of her members and he says, a final crusade, rid the world of Islam. Now, who is this and who radicalized him? Miss Pauline Hanson, maybe? Maybe his Bible? Maybe the wars of the end times according to the book of Acts? He says, a final crusade, rid the world of Islam. So radicals and radicalization can be on both sides, Islam and Christianity. Dylan Roof was a Christian who went and massacred how many black Africans in a church? How about Andres Breivik, who went and shot and massacred how many of his own countrymen because they supported Muslim immigration? And by the way, he was a Christian. How about Thomas Mehr, who went and executed his own politician because she supported, again, Muslims and immigration? So Christians do terrorism and murder as well.
And there's probably a substantial IQ difference between these people and Pauline Hanson, but the message is the same. So do you think that we would be consistent and accuse these people of spreading hate or vilifying Muslims?
Yes, consistency shows that you are ignorant and a fool yourself and have no idea about the Quran.
Would not dare. He would be laughed out of the studio.
Now, I think you'll be laughed out of the studio if you were there and were quoting verses out of context.
But in this case, he picked just the right person to push the same argument, which is now as follows. If you criticize Islam as it's written in the Quran, Muslims will join ISIS and attack us, and it's your...
No, he didn't say if you criticize the Quran, Muslims will join ISIS. He said, if you criticize the Quran, which is a statement he never made. It's your assertion, you dumbo. What Waleed Ali is saying is, you're feeling Islamophobia. If you're following ISIS, all you're doing, and their rhetoric and their misinterpretation of the verses of the Quran, and you're telling Muslims that this is really what Islam believes in, and this is really what generally Muslims believe in, and you're telling those Muslims, even those moderate Muslims, to now leave this country because you are just all terrorists and this is what your Quran teaches, you are actually accommodating people to join ISIS. That's what you're doing. By misinterpreting the verses and you're taking out of the context, and you're actually... what you're doing is no different than ISIS, basically, because what you're doing is you're helping ISIS. You're encouraging the ISIS interpretation because you're going out, you're telling those moderate Muslims that your Quran is actually a book of violence by misinterpreting the verses and interpreting it exactly as ISIS understands it. So you're conditioning and sending misinformation to the youth of these Muslims and telling them, yes, ISIS is true. ISIS is on the correct path. ISIS is on the right interpretation of Islam and the Quran. So you're basically encouraging moderate Muslims to become radicalized and join ISIS. You see, that is exactly what Waleed is saying, but you cannot comprehend it because you are an Islamophobic bigot that is no different from ISIS misinterpreting the verses of the Quran.
That's right, it's the exact same argument that's put forth by the Islamist group Hizb ut-Tahrir.
Notice, and this is what he does. He does now. So instead of going for the moderate Muslims and the general public of the imams and so forth, he picks out and singles out a Muslim organization like Hizb ut-Tahrir and people who put up signs such as behead non-Muslims and so forth. Now, isn't that typical propaganda? This guy's like a media propaganda machine. Take snapshots of radicalized people out there from just certain minorities and then tries to generalize it and say, look, this is Islam and so forth. Can you imagine I took pictures of the KKK in America who actually say kill homosexuals and so forth, and then I generally say this is what Christianity preaches and so forth, and then I try and say, look, there's a similarity between Christianity and the KKK? I mean, this guy talks about being laughed out of the room. You'd be laughed out of the room. And so will I. I'll be laughed out of the room by you, wouldn't you, for being inconsistent and using the fallacy of generalization.
Yeah, when deconstructed, Waleed's argument is no longer a moral one
No, you've just been deconstructed.
Against random bigotry and violence towards Muslims.
No, you're actually a bigot and you're stupid indeed. Take off your mask.
Against criticising Islam at all. Well, that should be very concerning for anyone who believes in secularism and freedom. Is Waleed Ali the kind of person who would blame the Charlie Hebdo victims for their own deaths? Let's go through his scenario step by step. So someone in the West criticises Islam, Muslim gets offended, Muslim sides with ISIS and attacks the West.
Nowhere did, so another stupid analogy, nowhere did Waleed Ali ever make that scenario. That's you implementing that scenario in your head. Waleed Ali never suggested that. That's your terrible... I mean, look how silly his example is. He's comparing this to Waleed Ali when he never ever uttered such a statement or made such a figurative example ever.
Mockery of Christianity in the West, which is fine in a secular society. And we don't see Christians slaughtering people and shouting God is great. If a Christian tried to kill Tim Minchin for singing the Pope song, do you think anyone would blame Tim Minchin? Or would they...
You can now go to my blog. I actually uploaded this on my blog, Mustafa Sayin 33 blog. You can see Christians in Africa kill in Jesus' name. It's recorded on Al Jazeera, and you can see the link below this video, and I'll put the actual article there so you can see it for yourself. More terror in Jesus' name. You can see the second link. A Christian on Facebook wants to kill Muslims in the name of the Christian God. You can actually see the Facebook quote there. Christians fight in Jesus' name. ABC News, International, American soldier, Christ fighting ISIS in Iraq. So this Christian went to Iraq. He's fighting Muslims in the name of Christ. In Jesus' name rifles, you can see military rifles which have got embedded verses of the Bible on them. You can see that in the Iraq occupation. Even the KKK want to be known as a Christian organization. This is posted by Huffington Post. And there you have it. There's other global research. American sniper killing ragheads for Jesus. The link's actually there. Christian wants homosexuals dead. You can see telegraph.uk. Christian praises God in the name. He will use an atomic bomb. The YouTube video is there. So I'll post the link here. You can see it. US Christian veteran wishes to behead Muslims living in America. And by the way, folks, nearly 70% of the US Army consists of devout Christians, and their motto they fight under is "In God We Trust." So all the US killings in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, all the Australians killing there for that matter, because the Australian parliamentary, where before it commences, it has the Lord's Prayer, which says, "Thy kingdom come, in thy be done, yours will be done," and so forth. You know the Lord's Prayer. And of course, in the Lord's Prayer, they go out and fight Muslims in those occupied countries. So all the US killings in Iraq, Afghanistan, the Australian killings in Afghanistan, Syria are all done under the motto, "In God We Trust," or under the motto, "Thy will be done." You know, throughout the rest of his video, he goes through a rant to say the religion of Islam should be allowed to be criticized, and criticizing it, if that means for people to join ISIS, he's basically saying that's not our fault. You see, we don't have a problem with criticism of Islam and the Quran. Waleed Ali never conflated the two and said you're making people join Islam because you're simply criticizing him. What Waleed Ali is saying is clear. He's basically saying if you misinterpret it and interpret it exactly the way ISIS interpret it, this makes people join Islam. Gosh, this guy is brain dead. He can't understand. You know, he's just full of all of this pressure that he had previously, thinking that just because criticizing Islam, this means people are going to join ISIS, and Waleed Ali is trying to somehow undercoverly shut criticism of the Quran. Yeah, this guy is seriously, what is he, man?
In Australia, chances are you know about the former Grand Mufti of Australia comparing unveiled women to abandoned meat. He argued that if women don't cover up and they get sexually assaulted, it's their fault.
Actually, you notice he goes to the Grand Mufti. I've referred to this in my other videos previously. Now, I just want to address his point, how he actually criticized the Grand Mufti on this, and this is a side point. Basically, these secularists or these Christians, they have this thought process where they don't want any blame put on the victim. Doesn't matter what the case is, but I'm going to show you a double standards here. Now, the Grand Mufti did compare women to meat to say, you need to dress up or it's going to attract the cats and so forth. There's actually nothing really wrong with what he's saying. But you see, these secularists want you to believe that, hey, there shouldn't be a problem in the way women dress and things like that. Well, let me ask this idiot. Does he go out and dress naked in the street? Why does the police tell him to put clothes on? Because he may harm others in society and harm himself in that process. There may be little children who go out and see his private part, right? And that may harm psychologically those children. So can we blame the one who is undressing themselves? Of course we can. So why is that any different from women who can sexually attract perpetrators and criminals and rapists, right? We're not saying she takes all the blame, right? Of course, the perpetrator is the one that's guilty, but what we say is that she should also put some measures into her own behavior not to allure such or put herself in danger. I mean, there's even a saying in the West that, you shouldn't walk by yourself at the alone, especially for a woman, after 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock at night, because something may happen to her. She needs to take responsibility for her actions, right? You need to be aware of your surroundings because there are criminals out there. There are rapists out there. You don't go walking by yourself at night, after midnight through the park, dress the way you want to dress. You just can't do that in our world. It just doesn't happen unless you want to live on Mars where there's no criminals. So pointing that out then becomes tragic, apparently, becomes an oppressive thought process towards women who are vulnerable to such attacks. Can you imagine if we took children and unsupervised, we put them in a park where there were known pedophiles in the area? And you know what? We didn't supervise them. We just walked away. And God forbid one of those children got raped. Will you not blame the parents for irresponsible behavior, or will you just blame the pedophile? I'm pretty sure you'll jump on the bandwagon and you'll blame people who are responsible for their actions in luring certain dangers. But you see these secularists, they keep trying to champion, oh no, we need to be different from religion. Women should be able to dress the way they should. They should be able to walk at what time of the day. It doesn't matter. They should just be able to walk free, dress the way they want. But then you know what happens? They get raped, right? They get assaulted and criminal statistics go up out of the roof. And then they blame Islam for trying to dictate how people should behave here when it's just probably just giving a solution to the problem. And you're trying to say, no, we don't want to hear the solution from religion, right? But of course, if a secular think tank got up and said, oh, you know what, maybe we shouldn't dress that way or so provocatively, or maybe we shouldn't walk in the street at that time of the night, that sort of thought process is entertained so long as he's not a Muslim and he's a secularist and he doesn't put any religion onto the table. But if he's a conservative secularist and he wants to bring an opinion, that's respected. But if anything from religion, no, we can't accept that. that thought process somehow becomes oppressive.
Now let's see what happens in a defining
and beheading the non-believers.
A lot of the
Exactly right.
movies are putting on.
Ignore the fact that it's Pauline Hanson. In that specific, there was no hatred whatsoever to. In that specific message, there was no hatred.
Leaders around the world in Egypt are coming out against it and said we need to revise what the teachings are in the Quran. It is about killing and beheading the non-believers.
The interpretation that a lot of the
Exactly right.
movies are putting on.
Ignore the fact that it's Pauline Hanson. In that specific message, there was no hatred whatsoever towards Muslims. It was a call for reform. Waleed Ali is attacking people who want to.
Call for reform. It's called to your ignorance. You should be reformed on what the Quranic interpretation really should be. And your stupid Pauline Hanson that misinterprets everything.
Reform Islam and blaming them for terrorism. But unfortunately, not everyone who watches the video will pick up on that. I want to show you the top comments from the video when I came across it, just so you can get an idea of the kind of audience this appealed to. So what do we have here? I'm dumb, and I usually don't understand a single word of a smart person, but this guy is the shit. He actually speaks some facts. And this video will save the world. Possible. Well, isn't that special? Waleed Ali, big with the intellectually challenged there. Well, for others it should be.
Talking about self-boasting, my video just debunked your video. So, so you want to go to comments for credit? How desperate can these people get?
Obvious that self-censoring and giving up the freedom to speak our minds and criticize bad ideas such as the ones within Islam is not the solution. It's like plugging a leak with chewing gum. How long do you keep doing it? Islamists would become everyone else bending over for them. They'd become more entitled and more demanding, and when someone finally stands up and criticizes them or the religion, the situation would be so much worse. The solution isn't to appease and live in fear. The solution is to reform Islam. Speaking of reforming Islam, this is Majid Nawaz. Both him and Waleed are Muslims and experts on countering terrorism. It's like plugging a leak with chewing gum. Are Muslims and experts on countering terrorism. Waleed are Muslims and experts on countering terrorism. I think there's some.
Right.